All right. Thank you.
I am Joseph from Hungary,
Very nice.
Budapest.
Budapest.
Okay, I'm Dirk from Switzerland.
Nice to meet you, Dirk.
Hello. I'm
Go ahead.
Anna. Hello. Do you have sound for me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm joining you from Portugal.
Portugal.
Yeah.
And then who else do we have here?
Hi, I'm.
Go ahead.
I'm Vineet. I'm from India.
India. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Hi, I'm Germano. Hello.
Yes, yes. Hear you.
From Blumenau in Brazil.
Brazil. Nice to meet you. And I see we have Tim Muth. He is in Florida, I know. And then Robert is in the Netherlands, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And did we miss anyone? Dirk, where are you?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, well,
And I'm from Switzerland. As I said, do you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
What's your location?
And I'm Jen Lee. I'm from Rochester, New York.
New York, okay. Anna Svirina, assume in Russia, Kazan. So, all right, okay. All right, so right into the business. The only thing I will ask you, you can mute your microphones when you're not talking, and it'd be a good idea because some people create feedback. So you can only mute yourself when you speak and mute it while you're not talking, so this way it will be your chat channel. I suggest that the way we go about it is literally go topic by topic. And so with, the recruitment and so on. And I really would like to hear your feedback and your suggestions and your comments. And maybe just a few words of kind of general overview before we get into the brainstorming. So I did look at the data just before the meeting now, and the numbers look, more or less the same as they look every semester, meaning that, in general, it went well, and in general, students were happy. And when it came to the concerns, it's always the same thing. So somebody on my team did not participate, or even sometimes several people did not participate. So one difference this time was, as you know, we tried this model that we call individual group. So where in the late track, we split all the tasks into 3 blocks, and each block was 2 weeks. And in week 1, students had to submit their work individually and had to work as a team on that same question. And the idea behind that model was that students would split the workload by the question, where I do question 1, somebody else does question 2, somebody else does question 3. And what happens is in many cases, they really don't collaborate. So they each does their own section, and then with the hope that they will be able to copy and paste everything into one document at the end of the semester. And 2 problems with that approach. One is that it kind of takes away the whole purpose of the project, so there is not much collaboration going on. And 2, some people do not do well their part of work, and as a result, the team finds out about that problem a few days before the final deadline, and it's too late to talk about it. Students get upset. So the individual group approach was designed to prompt students to all contribute equally during the project, so to each question. And then if there is a problem, it will be visible more, earlier. And at the same time, the goal was that students would collaborate a little bit more. And so that seems to have led to some changes in the dynamics of the teams. So overall, the numbers looks the same, but it seems like this time there were a little bit more complaints on the one hand from students who felt it was too much work, on the other hand from the students who felt that some of their team members didn't do as much as they should have. And we did as much as they did all the time, but this time the new model made it more visible. So in the past, students could kind of hide until the end of the semester and not do much, but the team members just didn't know about it. Now everybody has to make a little contribution every week. It became more visible when somebody's not performing, and so that led to a little bit more complaints about that, what we call free ride. The numbers are roughly the same. The report evaluations are roughly the same. So it seems like it wasn't too different from the other project, other semesters. There were some problems, like again, somebody not doing their job, and then professors and students. and then some other things, with selection and communication and some conflicts, and that's what those issues and perhaps come up with better solutions together. And so I'd like to go, literally from the beginning, from recruitment and, stage by stage, and very, very curious to hear your thoughts. By the way, about 20 people did complete this online survey, and some of them wrote literally pages and pages of suggestions. I was trying to summarize them, so hopefully I will also have time to voice some of those suggestions and address them, and hopefully together we'll be able to talk. So recruitment, 2 minutes. There is really not much new that has been said there. One of the big challenges we have here, not challenges, but issues that we deal with. On the one hand, our numbers or number of applicants grows, very rapidly year after year. So every year we get more applications, and so I suppose there is no problem as far as the number of the recruitment goes. The challenge is that the number of applications from the United States grows much faster than from other regions. So on average, let's say from the rest, we would see, 10-20% increase in the number of applications, whereas from it doubles every year. In fact, this semester is especially, I'm not sure if I should say good or bad, I guess especially good in terms of the larger number, but bad that it's even more disproportionate this time. So we have so many new universities from the US this time. And so the challenge here is, do we say no to most new applicants so that we can keep the teams balanced? Or do we say yes, but then have multiple American students on every team? Or do we try to recruit even more outside the US? And so I suppose the last one would be the main way to go about it. But then there are not that many options we have in terms of recruiting people outside the United States. People suggested things like, give out some templates, and we have some designs. So if anyone wants to give them out, I suppose we can send those copies or print, invite people through local professional associations and local conferences and local chapters. But we sort of have been doing that already, so I'm not sure how much more we can do. So obviously everybody can help, but I'm not sure if there is a drastic improvement we can have for regions. But I don't know, maybe you have some better anyone something?
Was I have a very interesting comment. I heard, I am in Hungary, but I representing a Slovakian university as well. And I heard from some students that the participant of the American students sometimes creating a very interesting tension, because the non-American, non-native speaking students expecting from the American participant reviewing the whole material, right. And the Americans don't want to be as a proofreader or something like that. And this year there was a small tension in one of the group that the Americans wanted to be as a normal partner of the group, not as a proofreader. It's a small comment.
Yeah, well, comment. Let me address very quickly this one and all the future comments about possible, issues. It is extremely important to recognize that many, in fact, most, if not all of these situations are normal, meaning that somebody may not be very cooperative, or somebody may have a different, set of expectations, or not even participate. And so the important thing here is that I don't think we will ever be able to fix all those problems.
Only it was a comment,
And at the same time, if we could fix them, though, I'm not sure if that would be a good thing, because, if a team happens to be perfect and everybody works very well, they have a good experience, but at the same time, they have not a true representation of what they will be up against when they do it again in the future as part of their. But yes, so obviously, we should try at least to do something about those things and try to smooth it out. Back to recruitment, though, any suggestions for how we can increase the number of awareness about the project in the United States?
I would have a comment about the number of Americans. I do not really see a problem in having 2 Americans in a group, or even 3 if the group is big enough. So if you have a group of 5 students for American, I don't see a problem in that.
Yeah. Well, so for someone outside the United States, usually it's not a problem. Just like for most American teachers, students having, let's say, 2 students from China or from Brazil wouldn't be a problem. So for them, that's cultural diversity. But I know that many American universities, join the project specifically to expose their students to international students. And so if there are 2 or even 3 sometimes American-based students on the team, that obviously kind of, feels like not diverse enough. In reality, what we have now is this semester, for example, so on average, the team was 6 people per team, and 2 of them were from the United States, and sometimes there was 1 more from Canada. Country of study. The good news is that some of those American students were actually international students. And so sometimes what happens is we may have 2 or sometimes even 3, but at least 1 or sometimes 2 of those are actually, a German study in the United States. And so I guess the problem is not as big if you go by the country of origin. But yes, I agree, Germano. So it's not a big problem, and students are still, even those from the United States, are still in different time zones, different universities. So it would be even better if we could have even more non-US based students.
Okay, so
yes, go ahead.
For me, it was the first year. So I was thinking, how did I get to know X culture? And I have been teaching international marketing for for many years, and I had not come across the project before. I was thinking about it, and I think I was researching a paper by you, and in that process I came across the project. And immediately I was researching, and immediately I asked to join. Because I suggested that maybe local conferences, marketing conferences, and you just said, well, we have been doing that. But that was because, well, more recently I do not go to that many conferences because of funding, but I had never seen in so I mentioned Euromed, so European conferences. So another thing, it just occurred to me, would it make sense to have, say, national ambassadors, representatives, something like that? So, for example, I think maybe you have other participants in Portugal, maybe not this year, but you had someone would try to get, I would try to get other universities or international marketing colleagues in Portugal. I do not know if it would work or...
Yeah, maybe we can even offer them some sort of, like if they organize, let's say, a session at a local conference specifically about X culture, maybe even offer them some sort of, like, I don't know, incentives, maybe like a travel stipend or something to go and present. Our resources are very limited. Maybe we can still offer something to make it worthwhile their time. Well, I guess we cannot decide all the details right now, but if you have suggestions for how this national ambassador program might run in terms of, what the job description essentially would be and what should be offered in exchange, if anything. If you could send me your thoughts, I suppose that's a very interesting idea. And I suppose there may be some sort of interest on the people's side to do it in terms of, not for the money, which we probably cannot afford anyway, but maybe that is some recognition, some simply, helping the project. Yeah. Well, if you have any questions more detail, maybe that's what we'll do, and even invite people to apply, to represent, and we can put their picture on the website so that, to give them some legitimacy, and maybe send them a box of, like templates and stuff in case they want to distribute some, or maybe allocate some budget if they want to write letters to the deans of the schools in the region and stuff like that. I suppose that's something we can do.
I have a couple of other suggestions. This is Margaret, and one would be to look at the journals where you're publishing research on X culture, and perhaps send letters to the advisory board members and other authors that are publishing there, because they obviously probably have an interest in this topic.
That's a very good idea, yeah.
Another would be if you have a research assistant, they could look at different universities around the world and identify some that are teaching international business courses, and then perhaps contact those people directly, or at least the deans of those business schools, and let them know about it.
What we did a few years ago, and maybe it's time to do it again, we went to the Academy of Management, basically membership site. So they allow you to see all the members, sorted them by the interests, and extracted all the names who listed international business as their area of interest. And so AAM allows you to get their contacts. And so it's been like 3-4 years ago. So we simply contacted them directly saying that, we know that you teach international business. We thought you might be interested in this project. And the response was actually quite positive. I was just not very comfortable because it almost seems like it's, unsolicited, advice or promotion. And so since then we would stick mainly with the Academy of International Business mailing list. But then again, not everyone is on the mailing list, and not everyone reads those messages.
Right.
And people sometimes delete them without even reading. So I assume.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a suggestion which relating to this problem. Some university in our Eastern European region have participated on the program 2-3 years ago, for example, one from Romania and another two university from Hungary. But now, this year or last year, they were not present on the program. And why not to, I would like to initiate them again.
Right.
I can imagine new teacher on the program. And this is one issue that, for example, replicate the so-called former participant, to contact the former participant, because I know some participating university left the program and might be new teachers or new preachers are there, and we can approach them.
So what you're saying is basically contact the university and not well, obviously we contact the professor.
If you can send me some names, which I know in my country, in Hungary and Romania, there are two potential universities. They participated in the past, but this year and last year they were not there. But maybe there are other universities, they left the program and we can contact them, maybe. This is also can be.
The time when professors do not participate again, they literally send me an email saying, I'm not teaching that same course anymore.
Yeah. But maybe new people, you understand.
There may be somebody else. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And regarding the recruitment, I have another general comment. We teachers have to do more about the promoting among the students the positive sides of the program, because I have 2 PhD students and they are very close to the student, and they could this year recruiting some students. Very important, the influence, you understand that telling them and the teacher are very important in the recruitment procedure.
Especially when the project is kind of on the voluntary basis and
I ask Betty here a question. In general, why there's very few participant schools from East Asia? It just seems weird.
That's a very good question, and I don't. I suspect that they just don't know about us. So East Asia in general, perhaps the language difference. But when I look at, for example, Africa, India, where English is basically the official language in most of the institutions, you would think that there would be many more participants. And so what we see is that virtually anybody who has ever participated from Africa, Asia, they continue participating. So from which I gather that that's a project they like and find useful. The problem is that most of those people are not necessarily members of the Academy of International Business or are on the list. And so they simply don't know about us because the way we promote it, it doesn't reach them. And so I don't know how, it seems like those who know, they participate, but many don't. So the question is, how do we reach them to inform them about the opportunity? And I don't know. Literally, maybe offering some people in those regions little travel stipends so that they can go, school to school and just talk to the deans and inform about us, or maybe send out letters or do some other, forms of promotion. Because it seems to me that it's not because it doesn't fit with their program. It's not because, they're not ready. It's just because they don't know about us.
I think, Vasil, that it would be good if you have somebody to dedicate to the search of the universities in countries like major universities, you know, like capital cities, something like this, and contact people, heads of the business departments. So it could kind of help you to reach out to these groups of
Send out a letter to all the professors who have ever participated, sort of not only asking for help, but also offering, you know, additional resources to them, at least as far as the materials they can distribute, or maybe, you know, as I said, if they want to send out letters, perhaps cover the mailing, you know, the fee. So things like that, and see if we can use help of our own, you know, people in those regions, if they can help.
But Vas, may I say a word?
Yes, go ahead.
Because you said, I mean, you mentioned before the pamphlets, the financial support with the mailing. Actually, I cannot really imagine that I send out letters to my colleagues, you know, but simple digital material, you know, a prepared email is actually all I would need, because now when I'm thinking about writing to 20 people, I would have to set up my own email, look for, okay, there's a video, there's something, the brochure as a PDF, the video link and a nice text is actually, you know, it would be easy to spread.
That's a good point. We have all of those materials, and I even, you know, include every time when I send out the recruitment notice, I also, we have like one that people can copy and paste, but at one, we don't really publicize it enough, and two, it's not in a very convenient format. And maybe I just should put everything in a nice formatted folder so people can just copy and paste and not even think about it. So that's a good idea. All right, well, let's move on then to the next question, because we've spent like half an hour on the very little problem, which is recruitment. So let's move on and talk about more important things. So
I have one comment was about the recruitment.
Yes.
Recruitment of the companies, because you know,
that is
how can we recruit companies? You understand?
That is a very interesting comment. We seem to have. Again, on the one hand, it's not a huge problem because we do have some companies to work with, but at the same time, there is always a shortage of very good companies. And and products with interesting services, maybe, you know, of the right size, because too small is also not good, too big is probably better. So, but yes, on companies, if you know any companies that you maybe work with or have contact with that benefit from, you know, from the ideas from our students, are able to offer an exchange, you know, a couple of webinars to introduce the company, answer like that. Yes, please, by all means, do let them know.
Okay, I inform you. Okay, good.
Yeah, we have, you know, some applicants for the next semester, but as I said, more interest in companies would be very beneficial, because as I said, some of the applicants are just startups. I mean, interesting products, but still very small. Some of the companies may be, you know, like a product that is very unique, and students will have a hard time understanding what exactly that is. Is with more traditional, you know, like clothing or food or maybe electronics, especially, you know, with a known brand, or even not known brand, maybe like a medium-sized company that does well in your region and is ready to go international, just doesn't know how and could use the ideas from the students. By all means, do put us in touch, especially now we'll have time for the next semester. So yes. Now another one, selection, and so we have to move quickly because we have so many questions to discuss, and I don't want to take more than an hour of your time today. Selection. So at this time, as you know, we have some selection process in place. It used to be that there was none. It used to be that the professors sent me the student names, and we put all of the students on the teams. And that was not a good idea because some of those emails wouldn't work. Some of the students wouldn't even know what's going on. So obviously we had to prepare some sort of a selection process. Now there is a little training module. So it's a fairly simple set of, you know, basically a document and some videos. And the students have to take a readiness test. The readiness test is not too difficult, but the main purpose of the test is to make sure that the student receives our welcome letter, so the email works. The student knows that he or she needs to do the test, so at least there is some sort of awareness about the project. And then obviously they have to answer at this time 80% of the questions correctly. Again, it may not be a very high threshold, but at least it indicates that the students can understand, for example, English, can read, you know, a simple training module and know what's going on there. And so I'm not sure how much we should change based on your comments in the survey. Most people say that we shouldn't make it more. meaning that we shouldn't add too many more additional training modules because it will be too much. Even now already, it feels like almost an additional course in addition to the course you teach. Tougher, again, some people said make the selection tougher. The problem again there is that not all students may be, perfectly fluent in English. Not all students may be very, equally prepared. And there is some value in those students. On the one hand, we would say that we don't want them if they're not, absolutely the best of the best. But at the same time, again, in the real organizations, there will be people who perhaps will be a little bit less fluent in the working language, a little bit less prepared, a little bit less skilled. And I suppose, making it, like 99%, correct, probably will be a little too selective. And so I'm thinking about maybe making it a little bit more selective, but it seems like the consensus seems that we shouldn't change too much here. But again, what are your thoughts and comments here? Should we make any changes to our selection process, and if so, which ones?
I think that the test itself is very good, and I agree with everybody that you don't need to do it any harder. But the major concern which my students raised was that there is the project has a different weight in, in the grade of the class. So some of the students said that the team members actually had just like 5% weight of the X-Culture project was just 5% of their grade, or no grade at all. They just had like just to participate. So obviously the students are not motivated at all. So I think that there should be some sort of like limit on the weight, which they at least 20% or something, because like they're very concerned about it.
Yeah, and we have that. So the rule now is that the project must be no less than 20% of the course grade, and on average it's about 30-35%. So most people assign actually more. And then the second rule is that the peer evaluations must be no less than 20% of the course of the project grade. And again, it seems like most people assign 25-30% to that. There are a few exceptions. One, at some universities in Europe especially, they do not allow, like literally there is a rule against making team-based projects part of the course grade. Unfair, because what if the student has a bad team? And so in some cases they say literally we would love to, but we cannot, by the rules of the school. And so those would be exceptions. And it appears to me that at least in some cases, the professors may sort of not tell us that in reality they give a lower grade to the course. What happens sometimes is that the professors know the rule, and in fact they have to put a check mark there somewhere. But at the same time, later on we find out that students say, oh, for me it wasn't whatever percent, and sometimes even it wasn't no percent at all. And we didn't even know about that. So I suppose there are some cases that just happen without us knowing it. But no, normally we want it to be no less than 20% and no less than 20% peer evaluations in the total grade. Some people even said, let's make no less than 20-30% the report itself. But I suppose most people make it, 50% or so anyway. So, and it seems to be redundant to enforce it. So
I wanted also to add a comment about peer evaluations, because some of my students, those who are reliable ones, who are hardworking, and I already know that they wouldn't say anything that doesn't like make any sense. So what they were saying, that they were actually working, hard and doing the job, like for example, first 2-3 weeks, and then they decided that they would kind of take it easy for a week, and they were immediately getting 0-1, like the lowest peer evaluation. So it's kind of also high level of, high dependence on peer evaluation is not very fair, because students set up expectations that they are going to work, and once they kind of stop working, they would immediately drop their evaluations, and the students felt that they are kind of jeopardized, trapped in this evaluation thing.
Actually, can we talk about that some more? So we have a bunch of questions, research and stuff, but those are, we kind of, those areas work fine, and, if we want to improve something, we can, but we don't have to. But participation and peer evaluations and free writing, that is the only issue that consistently is an issue. And that is an area where I feel we can make improvements. And if you allow me just a 5-minute kind of introduction, so you know where we stand now and where we come from. And then I do have some ideas, but again, I would like to hear your comments here. So one, and it's extremely, extremely important, so please, pay attention to the next 2 minutes. One, when we talk about free writing and some people not doing their share, there are two components to this complaint. One, some people really don't do much. Some people really don't participate much. But two, in any team, but especially in global virtual team, and we've actually even done research on that. The problem here is that much of the effort is not visible. And so my estimate is that about 80, possibly even 90% of the complaints about students not doing, like team members not doing their work, is essentially unsubstantiated. So yes, that's what students tell me all the time. But I think, I know when we go to those people accused of free riding and talk to them, almost always, like almost universally, the response is, what are you talking about? I do all the work. They don't do anything. Like I literally do all the work. And they are either lying or they don't know. And so what happens is, just like, with the professors and, when we prepare, for example, the symposia, I know that when I sit in my office and I don't see all those colleagues, team members essentially, my brain automatically assumes that they're not doing much or not anything. Whereas from their perspective, it's a whole different story. And so my students always tell me that, somebody on the team is not doing the work and complain, tell me the same stories that you hear. And I have no doubt that somebody in a different country tells the same story about my own students who complain. So much of this is just basically, not seeing, and as a result, not knowing that people actually do something. Because as I said, when it comes to investigating what's really going on, people are genuinely surprised to find out that they are labeled as free riders. Second, free riding is a complicated issue. So even when you have someone who is legitimately not participating, the question becomes, what do you do with that? And so we instituted, it's been about 3 years ago, this rule that, if 1 week you receive low peer evaluations, you get a warning, second week you get excluded. But the problem there is, first, how quickly do you need to start excluding people? Because, it's easy to talk about it when it's somebody else's student, like, oh, somebody somewhere in Ukraine, for example, not participating, let's kick them out. But same thing happens with your own students. I know that at least some of my students, are slow to start, and so probably would be excluded under very hard conditions, week 1. But who actually will do well, but, maybe was sick the first week, or maybe just didn't know how to start, or maybe, started kind of slow. And so we have to obviously be, give some room for, for dropping out for a week, for example. Maybe busy at work, maybe busy at home. Second, things like that happen in real life. Again, so even, with my, like you are professors, you all have terminal degrees in international business. You all participate in that because you want it and because once you participate, it's part of your job. But about 30% of you didn't time. And so if you cannot expect that from professors, I mean, like, what can you expect from regular employees? And so I think, like part of this, what's happening, it's not only normal, it's inevitable. And so that's another component. And so it doesn't mean that we have to be a little bit writers, but what I mean is that you don't want to be too quickly. And then we have to have a backup plan, like if your student gets excluded, how do you deal with that? So at this time, what we do is we don't want you to have to create a whole new project for a student who got excluded. So what we do is if a student is excluded, we allow them to participate individually. So same deadlines, same clients, same task, they just do it individually. And so this way they still complete the project, you can still see their work, you can still give them the grade, and you don't have to do anything different for them, they just have to work individually. But still, I don't know, I mean, how far we want to push it. So for example, peer evaluations. Some people said, let's, exclude if it's 2.5 or lower. Well, I suppose that's an open, that's a good question. But then some people say, well, many teams collude. So they literally say, let's give everyone 5s so we look good. And then even if somebody is not participating, you don't detect that right away. Or there would be a case, Peter Mengeson described a very interesting case and happens probably more often than we know. There is a team of, let's say, 6 people. And let's say there is 1 or even 2 people or even 3 people who are not actively participating. But because they're not actively participating, then they're kind of trying to be lenient towards the rest of the team so that they're not, mad at them. And so they keep giving everyone high grades. And so even if there is someone who is, a legitimate free rider, because of those lenient team members, his or her peer evaluations are relatively high, or at least above that threshold. And so you have this kind of hidden free riding where, people probably deserve to be warned, but we just don't know about that. And so what do you do with that? So do you go to each team every time you see slightest change, slightest problems and investigate? But when you have 1,000 teams, I mean, it's limited resources. How far can you go? Do you make it mercilessly, like any sign of problem you exclude, but then run into all kinds of other problems? So I don't know where to, to put that line. And so this time what we do is 2.0 warning, another week 2.0 or less exclusion. If a team tells us that they have problems and somebody is not participating, we allow them to get another team member. And luckily we have late enrollments. And so when a problem occurs, almost always we can add another team member to the team. And then, if we have received repeated complaints, we exclude them. And I don't know what, if that's a good way and if we can do something differently. And that's where I really need your help. And this is now, we are getting into almost philosophy. It's not science. So here it's very interesting to hear what you think about it, because I don't think we can come up with some sort of, like a scientifically proven way to handle it. So anyone? Ron,
yeah. I would like to add something. I think the way you're doing it now is good. Before X-Culture starts, I prepare my students for free riders, and I tell them that they have to get used to it. Like later in the work field, there will be free riders in their virtual team, wherever they will end up. So now it's about learning how to deal with them. So I think sometimes I'm happy that there are free riders in the team. They don't like it, but they somehow develop the skill how to handle it. So just keep on doing what we're doing now.
That's exactly what I tell my students. And once I even had a complaint about that in my teaching evaluations. I literally tell them, every time you come to me and complain about a problem in your team, I kind of feel sorry for you, but at the same time, I feel happy, because what you see now, that's exactly what you will see tomorrow. It will not get any better or any different. No. And so those of you who happen to have a perfect team, I mean, you have a better experience, but you learn much less, and you actually will be too relaxed for the next round sometime in the future and will be prepared. But then again, tell that to the students. As I said, one of them literally wrote in my teaching evaluations like 3 years ago, he wants us to suffer, and he literally said, I want to have a bad team. I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I said. So, but
one of the girls told me that she felt like she was participating in a social experiment. Right. But eventually, I must admit, that most of my students eventually ended up writing cards and saying that thank you for teaching us about professional world, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to learn how to deal professionally with the conflicts and with everything. So I totally agree with you. It just, kind of still think about how to improve it and all of that.
What I sometimes do during X-Culture, I organize meetings with the students who participate, and we just share experiences. And then they see that everyone is basically in the same situation, and they learn from each other, and then they somehow accept that there are free riders in the team. They understand that this is the way it goes. And then we laugh about the free riders.
Well, let me tell you what I think or what I would like to do next semester, and tell me if you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. One, I would like to start excluding essentially students or sending out the warnings earlier. So now we give them 2 weeks before we do anything, so just to get a head start. But I think starting next semester, we'll start sending warnings literally from day 4. So we start on Monday, and then they have Thursday, they have the first survey. And I think, if there will be students who will not participate, will not complete that survey, or the team will tell that they haven't heard from that student, I would like to start sending out warnings right away. So saying, the team says that you didn't check in. So what's the problem? I mean, if it doesn't improve by the next survey, we will have to exclude you. And so I know it may be a little too early, but then, the hope is that it will kind of put people in the right mood. And then another thing I would like to do is, since we now have more coaches, so people who volunteer, so best students from the last semester who become coaches to the new generation, we sort of have some resources to investigate each of those cases. And so my hope is that I will have enough manpower, essentially, to reach out to every student whose peer evaluations approach, 2, maybe even, once they fall below 3. So my hope is that I will be able to, assign like let's say 10, 15 people to each coach and say, okay, these are the people who potentially may not be participating very well. Would you just email them and inquire what's going on? Do they need any help? Do they, maybe we're just busy at work and it's just a temporary thing? More like, almost like a warning, but in a nice way. So kind of inquire what's going on, but at the same time send a signal that we know something's going on, and if it doesn't improve, we'll have to take steps. And my hope is that with those two interventions, it will make it even better. It's actually not that bad as it is now. So it's a small percentage of people who actually receive low peer evaluations. Just each of those affects like 6 or 7. And so the problem becomes sort of kind of, widespread, but the percentage of people who don't do much is actually very small. But my hope is that with those two interventions, early warnings and reaching out to everyone who shows any signs of, not full commitment, my hope is that that will, allow us to reduce the problem. The only downside here is that sometimes we hear the students say, even as it is, it's already too demanding, it's already too much. And so if we make it even stricter, what may happen is that some of your students who may not fully commit to this project may not be, putting enough time in it. They will come back to you and will say, Professor, it's just, I feel like I got a full-time job, and so it's a little too much for me. So that's the only concern that I have, how far can we push it? So, and I don't know, what do you think about those things? Would it be too much? Would it be... Joseph, you need to unmute your microphone. We can't hear you.
I hear. I have 3 points regarding this discussion. Firstly, the every week survey. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
The every week survey, this is very good. But on the other side, sometimes the social interaction sometimes didn't happen within 1 week. You understand?
Right, yeah.
This is my concern, because sometimes within 1 week we are not able to identify problems. You understand that? Sometimes the problem needs more time, and every semester, and that was one of the single critic even from the best student, that this is the every week survey sometimes is useless or something like that. Maybe we have to think about it. The survey is perfect, they agree, but sometimes, it's not easy to identify the social interactions or social conflicts within some days. You understand it? So
that's why we are always giving them a little bit more time before we take action, because yes, you're right. I mean, sometimes when there is a problem, they may need more than just a few days to fix it. Sometimes they could be busier this week, and so so obviously we're trying to be kind of act in favor of the student, and as long as we see that they're trying to do something, so we give them enough time. Likewise, even after we exclude the student, what happens in many cases, so this semester we excluded must have been about 50 students. So 50 in the end were excluded. Real number was more like 80, 90, or close to 100 probably. And so about half of them actually were put back on teams. So what happened was we sent them a warning, they wouldn't respond or wouldn't do anything about it. Next week we exclude them. But then like a week later, the whole team comes back and says, okay, this student, we know that he was excluded, but now he reconnected with us, explained the situation, seems to be working hard. Can we get that person back on the team? And so when there is an interest from the team to get that person back, we always, always put the person back. They said our goal here is, to create a good experience for the students, make your students happy. And so, if there is any way we can make it work, we always try to accommodate. So it's not exactly, a job where we just fire people. So our goal is to make sure that it works for them. And so therefore, yes, it's not as harsh and not as, immediate.
My second point is relating to the final evaluation. Our X-Culture participants are provided room to make a presentation in English during the final presentation day, when every student making in Hungarian the presentation, but the X-Culture student doing the presentation in English. In that case, the teacher, I mean me, my 2 colleagues, 2 PhD scholars, have opportunity to make additional assessment about the student involvement into the project, or this is a plus. Sometimes the dean or deputy dean coming to this session and will be a so-called very important ceremony of this program.
That is again a very, very interesting question. So first of all, obviously we want every professor to do it. We want everybody to have a big ceremony, a presentation. Some schools literally would invite like a mayor of the city and the press. At the same time, I know that it's not always possible because for American schools especially, those who are in the late track, in many cases the project for us ends literally at the time when the semester ends. So we simply don't have the students around for much longer to do anything else, other than maybe if we wanted to do it in the middle of the semester. Second, sometimes the class is too big for that. Like I usually have about 150 students of my own. And so if I wanted to give them a chance to present, I would literally have to spend like a whole week listening to presentations.
Yeah, in my class, only 50 people.
So what I do at my school, so I would invite several best students from the last semester to present a new cohort of students. So basically students who participated this semester I will select about 5 of them and they will do a presentation in the first weeks of January at the beginning of the semester for the new group of students. So the students will see a little bit, you know, what to expect, how they do. I don't have to invite all 150, so they'll a few of the best ones, and so it's sort of like but it's at the beginning of the next semester. But another thing we want to do is maybe do an online conference. So we have, you know, accommodate several thousand participants, and I'm not sure how exactly it might work, but maybe we can invite like the best teams to present at least conference, like, you know, maybe a few hours and stuff like that. So that
is a good idea.
Maybe because we do have the technology, so we do have now the software that allows us to do it. I just don't know what's, you know, the best way to organize it. Maybe we'll experiment with that, you know, in January for the participants from the last semester, and then if it goes well, maybe make it, you know, literally every semester. Another question I have for you, again, we're sort of running out of time. Go ahead, yes.
Okay, I had one comment and one hypothesis. The first thing that I noticed with my students, which are excluded much during especially the fall semester when I'm working with a private university, is the case that they never warn the team that they have any problems. I have no idea in the survey, do you expect any problems next week, like extra workload coming up, or maybe you're sick or something? And if they mark no, it's as we usually do. They haven't indicated that they expect any issues. It's their problem that they get excluded. But if because they don't want the team, but if something upcoming, then we can actually maybe automatically send a warning to the team. You know, this guy indicated that he's having some problems next week. So they do know in advance that he warned, and maybe they ask at least what's going on and what's happening.
That's an interesting idea. I wonder if it would be still better if that, you know, if student knows he or she will be busy next week, if they should just simply inform the team directly. Because if they inform us, by the time we process the data, by the time we distribute the, you know, the information to the team, not to mention that logistically it would be very difficult, you know, to process those data and compile them in a kind of readable format. But we can definitely think about that, or at least, you know, collect those data and see what we can do with them.
And maybe it can be included in the readiness test or something, the question like this, so they do know that you have to warn people that you expect something.
Yeah. That's a good one. One thing, by the way, I forgot to say that what we want to do again next semester. We did it before and it worked very well, but then we dropped the idea just because there was little time. But I think we want to do it again this semester. Team charter. Tim Muth suggested the idea of the team charter. You know, basically give them first week to work out the team procedures and protocols and how they're going to handle, you know, all kinds of situations. And so the idea is that if you give them the time to discuss it and work out how to handle it, first of all, they will know better what the expectations are. Second, they will know that there are certain rules in place, and so we participate more. And also that gives them more time to kind of get to know each other. And as I said, we did do it for a couple of years, like 3-4 years ago, But then we started adding so many questions that it became just, we didn't have an extra week for that. And I think that was a mistake. So I'm thinking about putting it back. And so one of those comments or one of the sections in that team charter would be, you know, if you get busy, you know, how do you handle that? So do you inform your team in advance, you know, like basically work out those protocols for your team so that everybody knows how to, you know, deal with that situation. And so that might be a good way forward. Another comment I wanted to make, it will not be for discussion, just so you know, in the comments that you provided in the survey, many people said that we should manage professors more and students less. And I do agree with that, but not, it's a little bit more complicated. So on the one hand, it is true that professors play a huge role. In fact, again, I may not say, maybe shouldn't be telling you that, but I guess why not? We have sort of like a dossier on every professor. So we start tracking your performance or performance of you as a professor and your class literally from the time you apply. And so if I had to tell or predict which class will have the most free riders or low peer evaluations, if I had to choose one single indicator that is most predictive of the problem, that indicator would be the number of errors the professor makes in the application. Whereas I sometimes kind of joke, the size of the font in which you send the student names to. We have that Excel file, as you know, and I always ask you to be very particular about how you provide the student names. So it has to be like first name, last name, and not last name, comma, first name. It has to be properly capitalized. So, you know, like if it's, you know, John with large capital J, it has to be that way. Occasionally, professors send me things that are, you know, in a completely wrong format. It doesn't necessarily have to be like different font or different format, but, you know, things happen. And if I see that, usually it's a very good indicator that there will be problems in that class. Usually it means that the professor couldn't, you know, didn't take enough time to read the instructions or didn't care enough about following them. And usually that means that the professor will not manage the class enough, and so there will be problems. Having said that, and so we would collect what I call strikes. So for every professor, we have the number of strikes. Everything, you know, anything goes wrong, we just add basically 1. And so professors who have like 3, 4, 5, 7 strikes, usually the ones whose students don't perform very well. The problem here is the following. So it's not a universal rule. So sometimes there are professors who are just a little less organized, but they're very good professors and students still do well. That's one. Second, sometimes our best professors mess some things up. Like, for example, you know, when you look at who was late with with report evaluations this semester, there are some names on that list who are extremely unexpected. So there are some professors who've been always, you know, an example of diligence and timeliness. And all of a sudden this semester, they just happen to be busy in that week. And so therefore, you know, excluding people just because something went wrong would be wrong. It just, you know, it's a good predictor, but not a universal one. Likewise, even the worst professor always has a few students who get perfect peer evaluations and do extremely well, and vice versa. Even the professors who get the best professor award, even they always have at least one person who was excluded for, you know, lack of participation. So professors sometimes don't have full control. So, so therefore, as I said, we can manage professors more in terms of giving them more resources, giving them more information about problems in the class, giving them more resources they can use for the training. Maybe even, you know, reaching out to them when we see too many problems in one class and asking if they need help, and perhaps, you know, we can assign more coaches. But I don't think it would be a good idea to just simply, you know, exclude or not let them participate next time, unless obviously it's a whole, you know, complete failure. We had cases 2 or 3 in the 7 years where professors like literally just disappeared for the whole semester and didn't care. So those are extreme cases, but you know, extremely rare. So in most cases, people, you know, work hard. Another problem is that, again, it's not always easy to compare one class to another. When somebody teaches at a highly ranked, let's say, American university and has an MBA class of 10 students, obviously for them it's much easier to show good performance than someone who teaches, let's say, in Ukraine in a no-name school with 100 students in it. So where English is not the first language, where, you know, the students are less prepared, where the university is less selective. So for them it's so much more difficult. And so no surprise that we would see more, you know, problem cases in those classes. But it's definitely not because the professor is not trying hard enough. It's a whole different game for them. So that's, therefore I kind of tend to be a little bit more lenient when it comes to dealing with professors, unless we have very strong evidence that it's a case when professor doesn't care. But almost never is the case. I mean, pretty much always professor always tries. It's just not always possible to resolve all these problems. And then the final comment that I want to make about the change that I would like to do next semester. Again, it will be a slightly longer introduction, but I would like to hear your thoughts because it's not a finalized decision. So the model for the students, the number of questions and the way they handle those questions and things like that. So our original model was that we have 8 or 9 questions. Each of those questions relates to a different kind of functional area. So there would be like a question on the entry mode, a question on the market analysis, a question on marketing, pricing, HR if needed. So all those different areas and topics that are included in a standard international business course. And the idea with that model was that if there are enough questions, each team member can choose something for himself, herself that fits his or her interests. And so everybody can find a niche that they can work on. It also keeps it general so students learn more. Like if we would add a question on logistics, for example, or a question on payments, well, it gives students an idea that, sometimes doing international business can involve, shipping products across the border or, making payments across the border. So that was the idea. But then obviously the problem was that students would just divide the questions, among themselves and don't communicate much. So you do marketing, I do HR, you do, for example, entry mode, and nobody communicates. Then we tried the model, as I said, this semester where it's everybody does individually all the questions, then everybody does that same question as a team, and then the cycle repeats itself. And again, it seems to have improved the quality of the reports a little bit, but also was not a perfect solution. So what I would like to do next semester is a combination of the two. And by the way, another model we tried 2 semesters ago was instead of submitting a question each week, so under the normal model, so like this week they report on the entry mode decision. Next week they report on, for example, market analysis research. A week later they report on marketing strategy, and then a week later HR, and so on and so on. Then one semester what we did was we kind of did a progressive model, where every week the teams were required to report on every single question. But in week 1, they would have to give just like literally one word. So they would just say, okay, we think the best market is Germany. We think that the best promotion channel is Facebook. We think that the best price is $10 and whatever else. Then next week, they provide a little bit more information. They say, okay, it's Germany because $10 is the best price because. And so they would kind of add a couple words. And then next week, it's like a paragraph for each question. And then each week is a little more, so by the end of the project, they have a full final report. And so that model worked well in the sense that, teams always knew where they stand, so there were no surprises last week because they would kind of progressively develop the report. But then again, it was so many questions each week that it was a little overwhelming. The model that we want to test this semester is a combination of all 3. The idea is that the first week, they just meet one another and develop the team charter and basically select the client and nothing else. Then next week, we would like them to individually provide very brief initial thoughts on each of the questions. So they don't have to write a whole section, but just tell them what they individually think would be the best answer to each of the questions. And the idea there is that will prompt them to kind of see the whole picture, that will prompt them to read all the questions and give them some thought and prepare a little bit individually so when the discussions start, they have something to say. And then after that, we want to have this same model where, there are 3 big blocks of questions: market analysis, marketing, and then operations management. But they will do it kind of, again, in 2 stages each time, but not as individual team, but just as a team. So for example, first 2 weeks, they work on the market analysis. So we will ask them to submit a very, very rough draft the first week. So basically the initial ideas provided by the team. Next week, kind of more complete draft. Then next week, 2 weeks, they will work on marketing, and then next 2 weeks, they will work on operations management. And so this way, again, we sort of combine this progressive model with, a block at a time. But then, as always, 1 week before the final deadline, they will submit the draft. They will get the plagiarism report if they need to. And then finally, they'll have 1 more week to finalize everything and submit. And so I'm not sure if it's becoming a little too complicated, if the standard basic model would be better, or if you think this approach would be better. So I'm just curious. Or maybe you have ideas for some other models that will ensure that people collaborate, that people start early, don't wait until the last day to do something, and at the same time where it's not too overwhelming or overwhelming too much work. So what do you think? And I'm not sure if I even explained it right, so maybe I should send you the kind of proposed instructions and let you take a look and then tell what you think. Would that be a better way? When there are no comments and no questions, that can mean one of two things. It can mean that, yes, everything good, everything's clear, everybody agrees, or it can mean that nothing's clear. Like, I don't even know what to say.
Hi, boss. Well, I think it is working quite well up to this moment, and I think you are better positioned than any one of us to judge and see what better we can find to improve. So whatever I think your proposal is fine to build up the project, not by steps, but building up the whole proposal at the beginning. And I'm thinking by this way. So it's difficult to judge if it's going to be better or not. But I think the idea is fine and
what I would say, Germano, I think, another reason to perhaps try again, we can always try.
Boss, I completely agree with you, whatever your comments, but I also feel that perhaps we can also increase the discipline. I mean, to say that maybe students from the economics discipline or students from the psychology discipline could be added, because we are also seeking the diversity among the students. So maybe the business school could get useful information from the students who are based in the economics discipline or in the psychology discipline, and they can complement or they can add in value to the existing team members. So the quality of the virtual team will definitely enhance. At the same time, I also feel that students should have the right to remove the participant, and there should be a code book, the conduct, some sort of code of conduct for the students, so that they should not feel that they are ethically incorrect, like giving the low scores to their team members. So there should be a kind of code of conduct that on what basis they should give 4 or 3 or 2 to their team members. Because I personally feel that students are not extremely sensitive towards their team members, and that's why they do not want to feel bad from their virtual team members. So this is my point of view, which could be looked into.
Yeah, I would also say to that, it's a very good comment. And since you again brought up the issue of removing people who are not, behaving right, I will again add one more time that it's not a clear cut. It's a very, once you start investigating, you see a much, much more complicated picture. We have a paper now that we have just recently submitted to a journal. I can send you the draft. Where what we did in that semester, we went out and interviewed the free riders, and actually have been doing it ever since, every semester. So every semester we have, as I said, about 50, 60 people who are excluded from teams, who are bona fide, empirically proven free riders. And so when we go and interview them, you would think that the discussion would be, okay, so your team tells us that you didn't participate. Why wouldn't you tell us, why didn't you participate? And so almost always, like it was like 80% of the respondents, they say, like, what do you mean? I participated. I did all the work. I mean, did they really exclude me? I mean, this was so unfair because I did all the work. They probably envied me. And so that's first component. Second, you start asking them, so, but if you didn't do much work, I mean, what would be the reason? And again, they provide very reasonable reasons. So they would say things like, well, I was trying to participate, but then, they didn't listen to my idea. So I just kind of kept it quiet then because I lost interest. So I was still there and was still trying to help, but, they just didn't listen to me. So I didn't, say much more. And then eventually they just rated me as not participating and excluded me, for example. And so, as I said, in many cases, it's not a very clean case when somebody, intentionally and knowingly does something wrong. In most cases, they don't even know about that. In fact, even in cases when we have like cases of bullying or cyber stalking, like every semester we have 1 or 2 cases when usually a male student likes every picture of the female student on the Facebook, keeps sending her love messages and, basically behaves sort of inappropriately. And so we go to the professor and say, well, it's a little, unprofessional. Can you talk to the student? And then first the professor would say, like, what do you mean it's unprofessional? He likes her and he tells her that he likes her. What's wrong about that? And then we say, well, in some cultures it's a little, okay, well, let me talk to the student. And then the student replies and says, what do you mean? I mean, I've been nice to her. I only said that I like her and I like her pictures. I mean, how, like, what's wrong with that? And you say, well, you know, so kind of explain to them, and they're all right, well, I'll stop, but, you know, I don't see anything wrong with that. Likewise, when you have cases of bullying, when somebody literally becomes aggressive towards somebody else, you would think that you would tell them and they will say, oh, I'm sorry. In most cases, they say, no, she actually started the fight, or, you know, she's not doing anything, so I have to do. So basically, all the time, they provide you some sort of a sensible explanation. And so if you are the professor of one student or the other, you will easily take one side or the other, not because you have different values, but because, you know, depending on whose story you hear. So as I said, it's never, almost never, you know, a clear-cut case. Almost always it's, you know, and when it comes to excluding, you know, that's a serious step, because for the student that means, you know, bad grade, and for you as a professor it means an unhappy student. As I said, hardly ever do we have, you know, solid evidence when the person is, you know, needs to be excluded. The only cases really when it's so clean is when, you know, student stops participating and you reach out to the student to see what's going on, and the student doesn't even reply. Maybe drop the course, or maybe, you know, completely lost interest. So those cases are easy, but those are rare. So most of them are, you know, as in any conflict. So, all right. So any other interesting comments, suggestions, observations? So we're sort of done with all the topics that I wanted to discuss. And sorry, I didn't give everyone enough time to talk. So now is a good time to, you know, whatever we didn't cover. So please go ahead if you would like to.
Vasio, can you hear me?
Yes. Edgar? Yes.
Yes. I have some suggestions to you for the next projects. First, I don't know if it's possible, but if possible, to put the deadline on Saturday, because my students, most of them talk to me, oh, Friday it's terrible, professor, because Friday we work and study and we don't have time to interact. Maybe if possible on Saturday it will be interesting to evaluate just. Another suggestions. During the project, you can generate some video records and put in the X project page to give orientations to the professors to help the students about the main objectives at that week, because basically we did the project start and then correct the project. And I have read the projects, and there are many different levels of development projects. Yes. And this could help us to generate a more common objective, to improve the level of the reports. Just one small video each week. You can use our page and give to us some suggestions about what in this week we will develop in the execution. What is the main goal? And we can talk to the students not about the specific project, but about the goal of that week. This could help the development of the project. This is my suggestion, basically.
That's a very, very good idea, Edgar, especially, kind of plan for each week and maybe a little overview and maybe some materials. That is actually something we wanted to do for a long time, just never got about, to do it. But I think we will do more of this week. So there will be probably like a little mini video lecture, for the topic of this week, and a little, maybe some, materials that professors can use. It doesn't mean that they have to use it, or it doesn't mean that everybody has to review them. But for those who would like to know more, first of all, what's going on and what needs to be done, and second, if the course is something, that may not cover some of those topics, we want to provide enough resources to the students and professors to sort of, get up to speed on those issues. Because again, the content of the courses sometimes is different. And yes, obviously not every student, not every professor may be fully prepared for each of those topics.
Ballerinas and princesses.
Oh, we have a research assistant. Who is it then? Yes, but yeah, thank you so much, Edgar. That's a very good comment. Yeah, who goes next? Anyone? Yes.
Plus, Xiaohua from University of San Francisco. I just want to comment. I want to follow up on what you said about having, some of the top teams. I think that's a fantastic idea. And if we can do that for students every time before we start, so give them an idea what a good project should look like.
Right.
And visually, I really would like to see that.
That is definitely a must. We kind of have done it before, so I would send a link sometimes to the best reports, but I don't promote it enough, and then it gets lost, and people forget about it. But yes, we definitely can select the best reports from the last semester and give them as examples. And on top of that, what I would like to do also, invite members of the best teams this semester to record a presentation of their work, and also basically kind of share their wisdom and how they did it, so that people who are interested in, in learning more from the best have those resources. Again, it doesn't have to be mandatory, but those who would like to see what a good report looks like, and those who would like to hear from the team that wrote that report, hopefully we will have those sort of resources available for anyone who wants to review them.
But also, is it possible to actually post their written report as well? The best.
As I said, I have done it even this semester. So at some time, there would be an email that goes out both to students and professors where I say, here is a link, and that's the top 10 reports from the last semester. The problem is that it seems like I sent it at the beginning of the semester, and most people either skip it or miss it or forget about it. And so when they actually need it, it's,
yeah, it's hard to find. Somewhere it should be listed on a website. It's easy to find.
Directly at them, in the readiness test, and say download and save. And so this way they can download it right from the beginning, have it on their hard drive, and can refer to it every time they need help. That's definitely a very good idea, easy to do, no problem at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vas, I have a question about presentation. You remember you had this webinar presentation for the company members, and one or two of my students wanted to present, but they didn't get to present because there's just one. Can you tell us a little bit more about selection criteria or something?
My mistake, or whatever didn't happen, it was my fault. And so here is what we have in mind for the next semester. And by my fault, I mean the webinars are extremely time-consuming to manage and very hard to do. For example, this semester we had 9 companies, and we wanted to have 3 webinars with each one of them. And so that's basically 27 webinars, but a webinar takes like half a day. So a lecture, you just show up, you teach, and you go home. With the webinar, you have to set up the page, send out the invitation, send out the reminders, make arrangements with the presenter and students, and then after that render the video and post it. So it takes about half a day, just too much time, and I think I was a little too much into it. So for the next semester, what I would like to do is hire one of the coaches to do it, so that there is a dedicated person whose job is to schedule those webinars and maybe even manage them. Second, we would like to have only 2 webinars per company unless the company wants to do more. And so there will be 2. One will be an introduction of the company. And so here the company talks and the students listen. And then maybe students ask questions. And then again, the company provides the answers. And then the second webinar will be closer towards the kind of middle of the semester. And so the goal of that one is to give a few teams a chance to present. And then the company will listen and then provide feedback on those presentations with the hope that the feedback will be more universal and other teams will learn from this. This is what we tried to do in the past, but there have been 2 problems with that. One, almost never enough teams sign up for, to do the presentation. So almost always it would be nobody or maybe 1 or 2 teams who say we would like to present. And so that becomes a problem. And then some of those teams that sign up even don't show up sometimes. And so that becomes, somewhat problematic. Second problem with that is the teams that show up for the presentation often show up not entirely prepared. So in the way we envision it, or in the model we envision it is, a prepared team member shows up and does a nice, neat presentation in like 5-10 minutes. The company provides feedback, and then another team does it, and then feedback, and so like 3-4 teams go through this process. In reality, as I said, we don't get enough teams. Those that show up, in many cases, they're not really ready to give a presentation, so they just start asking questions and things like that, and so the feedback doesn't work very well. So what we did in many cases was, since we have those weekly submissions, we sort of know what the teams are working on. And so in many cases, when there are not enough teams to do the presentations, I would simply go over, the submissions that they submitted in the text-based format, and basically would provide those, a summary of those answers to the company and ask for the feedback. And So this way there is really no presentation, but there is still some review of the common answers on the table, and then feedback on those answers or on that feedback. And so that seems to have worked kind of okay, but as I said, in the next semester, what we'll try to do is to use this model that we originally had in place and enforce it through a better process of signing up and selecting the teams. So as I said, we did purchase the software that allows us to do the webinars at a more kind of professional, on a more professional platform. There will be a page where students can more formally sign up. There will be automatic reminders, once people sign up that you are one of the presenters, but then right before the presentation, they'll get a reminder email. So things that we didn't do in the past. And so my hope is that with that, it will be a more kind of organized process, and especially if somebody will be specifically responsible for managing it. So the only, area of concern still is, will enough teams sign up? Because it seems like some teams are just not comfortable. Others think that they have great ideas and they don't want to share them because they're afraid that somebody will steal them. And so that's where we'll have to rely on you professors, to help with both recruiting the presenters and maybe even preparing them for the presentation. So, and then another thing I would add also to that with the webinars, the truth is that most students don't attend them. We would have, out of like 4,000 students in the late track, we would have maybe 15 students watching live, maybe 20 students watching live, maybe 1 or 2 trying to actually join and talk, and then that's it. Though then in the next week or so, about 1,000 people will watch it in the recording, and so I suppose people still benefit from it and still watch them. But when the actual webinar comes, there seems to be not much. I'm not sure if it's not much interest or students have classes at that time or something else that prevents them from participating, but it's not that many people who actually join live, so it's a very small number.
Yeah, I think it's mostly a time conflict because most of the times I was talking about webinars and everything. Most of the students would have classes during that time or they're working, so you shouldn't take it personally for the webinars themselves, but it's just like time management and time conflict.
And then the time zones. I mean, no matter what time we choose, like half of the planet at that time is sleeping basically. And so, we normally try to go with roughly this time. And so it's like morning in the United States and, Latin America, North America, still not too late in Europe, sort of too late in Asia, but, students can stay up long enough. But even with this time, I mean, in many cases, it's still hard for many students to, like they would have classes or they would be too late at this time or, have dinner. So not always possible. But as I said, we did buy better software for the webinars, actually tested 3 different softwares over the last month or so. With the coaches, we had endless webinars, and it seems like Zoom is the best one for this. So hopefully it will improve both the experience, but also the sign up process and the reminders, and hopefully that will make it easier to manage it.
And for this purpose, I would suggest you to send, because it was my first time participating in the project, so I didn't know about webinars. If I knew about them ahead of time, I would be talking with students about it, and I would have prepared them, for this purpose. So if you could send like some sort of messages, announcements in advance, it would be good too.
And so when I started apologizing for me not doing it well, one of the mistakes I made in the past was not forcing the companies to set the date before the project even starts. I would, think, oh, those are busy executives. They can plan like 2 months in advance. And I think that was a mistake because in many cases, the webinar date would be set like literally 2 days before the actual webinar, when it's too late to, to inform the students. And, and so maybe that contributed also to some of that low participation. So this time I'm extremely strict with all the companies that we are talking about participation, that they have to give me the data and the time, like literally now, like before the project starts, for the future. So this way you will have the dates for the whole semester, students will have the dates for the whole semester, so it will be easier to plan. And so we'll introduce some discipline in this process and hopefully will help overall.
Thank you so much. And I also have another question, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask you about this coaching program application. Several of my students wanted to apply and they sent a message, but they haven't gotten a response yet. They sent like an application about a month ago. So what would be the waiting time, like sort of period, so that I could like let them know, because they keep asking me questions about it?
Excellent question. In fact, I probably should dedicate a few minutes to this. So we've been testing it for, I believe, 4 semesters now, and so this last semester and the semester before, so now it seems to be working very well. I still see ways to improve it. It's still not as perfect as I want it to be, and then we had some problems with the manager of this program this semester, so the guy was moving from Germany to Spain to start his MBA PhD right in the middle of the semester. And so some communication with the coaches was a little slower. And then as a result, some of the coaches responded to some of the requests slower. But the idea there is the following. So the students who did well last semester can apply to serve as coaches next semester. They will have to take very extensive pre-project training. So they have 4 weeks when each week they have to take 4 training modules. Things like, for example, how to give feedback effectively, how to resolve conflicts, online collaboration tools, coordination within teams. So all the things that we know are important for coaches, and we know the questions they receive, and so they have to basically get training in that. They even have to take a separate module specifically on international business, where we sort of provide an additional crash course on all of those questions that students have to answer, like entry modes, pricing, promotion channels, country analysis, SWOT, all that stuff. Then they have to take a test, and only if they pass the test, they are allowed to be the coaches. Because again, we don't want people who are not prepared, to basically serve as a coach. So last semester, about 400 people applied. Of those, I selected 50 just because I wanted to keep it manageable while we were still testing. Of those 50, 37 passed the test. So there were 13 people who dropped out at the theory stage. And again, some of them seems like they didn't realize how much work it would be. So they dropped out not because they were not smart enough, but just they didn't realize how much work it would be. And there were at least 1 or 2 who were not prepared enough. But then the other 37 who passed, so they served as coaches, and so they did several things. One, we created this email address, coaching@xculture.org, and students would send questions, concerns, samples of work, and ask for feedback. And we would get about 20, 30 of those a day. So it must have been 3,000 maybe over the course of the semester. And so the guy who coordinated the program would read those emails every day, and so assign cases to coaches. And so in the simplest case, it would be, for example, here is my page of the answer for this week. Would you can provide feedback? Sometimes it would be something more serious, like somebody not participating. Can you maybe call that person and investigate what's going on? Sometimes it's a conflict. If it's a serious conflict, we would go to Tim Muth, one of our professors, who then does more serious investigation. But if it's something simple, then the coaches would deal with that. Then second, the coaches would read the weekly comments from the students. The students write each week. The last question is, in your own words, explain or describe your experience. And so what happens in many cases, there may be a problem in the team, but the students are not comfortable, asking for help. But when you read their comments, you kind of recognize that there is a problem. And so what happens in those cases, when we identify comments that indicate a problem, we would assign a coach, and he would just simply reach out to that student and say, okay, I was reading your comments and I see that there is a problem. Would you like some help? And in almost all cases, students say, yes, sure, I'm glad that you contacted me. Yes, there is a problem. I just didn't feel comfortable sharing that. But yes, this is the case, and would you help me? So they do that as well. And then also by reading those comments, they also kind of stay up to date with what's going on in the team. So for them, it's a very, very useful exercise, because you essentially get to see behind the scenes of all those, whatever the number of teams they would be assigned. And then finally, they had to all prepare a live webinar. And so that was a little slower than I expected. So they all did at least one webinar. But as I said, in many cases, it was not as early as I would like it to be. And in some cases, it was even after the project was over. So that was more for them to train. And then even when we did it during the semester, again, not many people attended, but they would do webinars on, for example, these are the common problems I see, and let me address them. For example, I read your reports, and these are the good and the bad things, so let me talk about them. Or for example, they would talk about plagiarism. They did one webinar. They did one webinar on academic writing, APA style and all that stuff. So we would like to do more of that in the next semester. Now, in terms of the selection, I'm waiting for the final results, and probably sometime this weekend, I will send out the invitations. The idea there is that we will probably invite top 50%, maybe top 25% of the students from this semester. So there will be a large group of people who will be invited. So as long as they did very well as team members, as long as they wrote a good report, they will get the invitation. But then once we get the invitations, I think we'll take a closer look at the applications, and then maybe, we still want to limit it to some numbers. So I think we can expand it to maybe, 100 total, but probably not much more than that. Or in fact, probably even 100 would be a hard group to manage. And so from those, who apply, we will select the best, whatever the number will be, let's say 100, and then they will have to go through the training. And then it's up to them to pass it. And my hope is that everybody will pass. And if they do, they will go through this exercise. And so in the end, they will have several things that will help them, several things that will essentially, they can put on the resume. One, they will be able to say that they served as coaches, as essentially almost like managers, resolved conflicts, help with, provided feedback, help with all kinds of, situations. The portfolio will contain case reports. So every time they are assigned a case, they have to write a page report, what they did, what happened, how they resolved it, useful thing. They prepare a pre-recorded video lecture. They prepare a live webinar, and they prepare a text-based training module. And again, this semester it was slower than I wanted it to be, so most of that stuff came too late for the students to be useful, so we will use it for the next semester's training. But also the coaches will be required to do those things earlier so that they can still, benefit this semester's students, not only next semester's students. And then obviously in the end, they will get all the recommendation letters and certificates and all that stuff. And so very positive feedback. This semester, by the way, one coach already got a job because of his coaching job. So we have this guy, Stefano, so he's in Italy. And so he had a job interview for something else. He's not a student anymore. And so he said literally nobody was interested in him until he said that he serves as a coach. And they're like immediately, oh, tell us more. So he got the job. He sent us a very happy email about that. So a major company there in. So that's a kind of long introduction about coaching. So the invitations will go out probably within 4 or 5 days.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And I must tell that my students also had already feedback on the X-Culture participation, those who had mock interviews and those who had just general interviews for job. As they mentioned to me, as soon as they say something about X-Culture, employers immediately get interested because they haven't heard about it. So there is like a kind of dialogue starts because they start asking questions about the X-Culture and want to know more about it.
And by the way, a few things will happen in the next few days. So we will start sending out so most professors, hopefully, when we send you the certificates, hopefully you print them and distribute to the students. But I know not all professors do it, so we will send each student who successfully completed the project their own printable version of the certificate. So this way, if the professor didn't distribute them, the students will still get them. But then in addition, they will get a personal performance review. So we will basically tell them how they did compared to the rest of the class, as well as provide the feedback on the report that you provided in the evaluations. And then we also asked coaches to provide some more of that. And then they will also get a personal cultural intelligence report. So they all took a cultural intelligence test. And so they will get it's like a 5-page report where it tells them how they did compared to the average in the population, but also what the strengths and weaknesses were and how they can further improve their cultural intelligence. It basically explains them what it is, what the results are, what they mean, and what they can do about it to improve them in the future. And then finally, and probably most importantly, they will get a detailed recommendation letter. So the letter will be like a 2-page letter that explains what they did, what skills they acquired, what experiences they acquired, and then also like a little performance review in that same recommendation letter, and then literally recommend or not recommend. So there is a formula there, but essentially if they get good peer evaluations and the report is good quality, the recommendation letter will say, I can confidently recommend this person for a job that requires teamwork and like business problem solving. If the peer evaluations are lower or report quality is lower, it can say, maybe drop the word confidently recommend and just simply recommend. And if it's really low, it can literally say, I cannot recommend this student for. And so that's a very small percentage, but again, some of them do not deserve a recommendation, so that's what the recommendation letter will say. But most of them will get strong recommendations, most of them successfully complete the project, and so that's the part of documentation that they're most excited about, because I know that's what they then take, for job interviews, and in many cases we hear very positive feedback on that. So it will be in a printable, high-resolution PDF file, so they can save a copy, print it anytime they want, and so hopefully that will help them in the future careers.
Will you send these recommendations and results of cultural intelligence test and the other recommendation part to professors or not?
I already have, in fact. So at the beginning of the semester, I sent you the text from the last semester, And I think I even included that. In fact, I know that I included it in the readiness test where I literally gave students a preview so they can see what it looks like. But I know that in the beginning, so much is happening, so people probably missed it. Yes, so definitely I'll send that also to the professors. Plus, in addition to the documentation that will go to the students, professors will also get, we will send each of you a recommendation letter, and each of you will also get a certificate. And then those of you who asked for a letter to be sent to your boss, like the department chair or the dean, we will do that as well. And so I will send a reminder about that again soon, so that if you haven't requested one but would like to receive one, there is a little form online where you can provide all the names of the people the letter should be sent to, the address and stuff like that, and we'll do that as well. What's interesting, so about 2/3 of the professors say, yes, please send such a letter to my department head, for example. And so we would literally say, things, it's an important thing for the students. We know that it helps students. We know that it takes a lot of your time. So we thank the department, the school for the support they provide you so you can deliver this project. And so basically comment on your wonderful performance. And so, basically, just say thank you so much for your continued support. And what's interesting, so it's going to be about 120 professors who will ask for those letters. Many of them will say send one to the department chair and one to the dean. So there will be like a total of about 200 letters that we'll have to send out. And what's interesting, of those, like 2/3 will actually reply. So then we'll start getting emails from the deans saying, oh, I didn't even know my professor was participating. Oh, thank you so much. This is so cool. Yeah, I'll talk to her. Or vice versa. Oh, yes, I know. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that she did so well. And then we have to kind of reply back. So it becomes like, like 1,000 emails, just, thank you, and then response, and then thank you for the response. So, but it's also kind of rewarding because it, makes you feel good that people like it and, they appreciate it. So we'll definitely do that as well. So that will be all happening probably next week.
Thank you.
All right, so it's been much longer than I expected, and I'm surprised that we still have 20 people here in the room. So thank you so much for your time, and have a nice weekend. Merry Christmas, good break, winter break for those of you who are on the break. I know that in some countries there is no break. Like, once you get closer to the equator, they don't really have that same, schedule like spring, fall. So they just started the semester whenever they want. So, but I assume most of them will still have some sort of a winter break. So stay in touch. In all of those questions that we discussed, if you have any comments, I apologize, we just didn't have the time for everyone, to give enough time to speak. So if you have any ideas or concerns or comments, please do send them to me by email, especially like within the next week when we will be finalizing the design of the project for the next semester. All of those comments are extremely important. So if you have something to say, do send me an email. It's important, it helps, because otherwise I may not even know some of those things. And so I really appreciate that.
And on our part, we would like to thank you for developing and supporting such a great project and for giving us an opportunity to participate in it. We really enjoy it, and thank you very much. Happy holidays to you too.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, and hopefully to see, we will see all of you next semester. So, really hope to see you all. All right, well then,